Well, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. In my last video, I talked about theoretical and empirical research with structured or unstructured data. And that actually relates to general approaches to types of research, which I'm going to talk about. Theoretical research, qualitative research, and quantitative research, and some variations on that. So stay tuned, and I'm going to talk about all of that in glorious detail in this video. If you get a bunch of linguists in a room who come from very different backgrounds and different theories, they might start arguing within about 5 minutes. At least that's the way things were back when I was in grad school. Maybe it's better now. Why is that? Well, they have different approaches to studying language, sometimes very different approaches. They ask different questions, they have different goals and objectives, and they use different kinds of data, and they do different kinds of research. Now, there are a number of different research methods, like different kinds of laboratory studies, different kinds of classroom experiment designs, and different kinds of research methods that we would use with conversational data and text data and so on. I'm not going to get into all of that. I want to talk about the general approaches to studying different things in different fields of study. I'm going to talk about theoretical, qualitative, quantitative research approaches, which relate to the types of research questions I talked about in a previous video, like theoretical questions, empirical-based questions, empirical-based research with structured or unstructured data. So the theoretical, qualitative, quantitative relate to that. And then I'm going to talk about several variations or kind of little hybrid mixes of those in this video. Let's start with theoretical research. Theoretical research involves mainly the study of the object itself without much outside data. You don't go out and gather data. You study the object itself, whether it's a poem, a short story, a writer's writing style, or maybe it is a philosophical question, or meanings of particular words, where you're studying the semantics of words and such. You're mainly studying the object itself without doing a lot of data collection. It's mainly based on logical or theoretical arguments by looking at the object itself, maybe comparing things, maybe comparing it with similar things, comparing this poem with similar poems or related poems, for example. It's guided by often a theory and or the researcher's own observations and intuitions, and often those intuitions are guided by theory. These are things that you can't necessarily prove, and oftentimes, this is generally in humanities fields, you're not concerned with proving something necessarily, like your interpretation of a poem or a short story. You're not trying to prove it. You're just trying to argue that it's a reasonable interpretation. My interpretation makes sense, and it helps us to understand this in a better way or in a unique way. So humanities, a lot of humanities research, like literature studies, culture studies, philosophy, involves theoretical research, and you can't necessarily prove something, but you can provide good arguments for something. So again, typical areas are philosophy, literature analysis, semantic analysis, theoretical linguistics like semantics and syntax. Now maybe mathematics falls under this category too, except math is different because you can prove stuff in math. You do prove stuff in math. So it's a lot of theoretical, mathematical argumentation, and you do prove something. But in humanities fields or in theoretical linguistics, it's not necessarily about proving something, because you can't prove something with just theoretical arguments unless it's math, because math is kind of different. Examples. Someone's interpretation of poems, short stories, study of influences on the writing style of a famous author, ethical arguments and other arguments in philosophy. How does this person use metaphor? What is metaphor? What is meaning? What influenced this writer's use of language and how she develops characters in her story? theoretical linguistic examples within this theory of grammar. How do you explain the two types of direct object constructions in this language and why they're used and their underlying structure? How do we explain how people use a particular set of expressions in different contexts, and how do the meanings derive from maybe the literal meaning of the words? That could be more of a theoretical kind of paper. Papers written within theoretical frameworks tend to be more varied in their structure. There might be a certain kind of general structure, maybe if you're writing in philosophy or something, but in general, the paper itself can be a little more free form. You're probably going to talk about what people have done previously and try to show that your interpretation is maybe better or more valid, comparing your findings with someone else's findings, perhaps. And that's what academic researchers might do. Moving on to the empirical stuff. So empirical can be qualitative or quantitative. So empirical means you go out and collect data, or you use a data set of some kind, original data. Now, it can be qualitative, which involves more unstructured type of data. There isn't an inherent structure in the data set. It's kind of stuff you can't put into like spreadsheet cells with like rows and columns and stuff. It tends to be more unstructured data. We'll talk about this in a later video, but there are ways of maybe bringing some structure into it as you analyze it in the process of analyzing the data. But the data itself are unstructured. It could be whole text, it could be recorded conversations, it could be observations, detailed observations of, say, what happens in a classroom or what happens in the people group that you're observing. Open-ended interview questions where the subjects give open-ended, free-form responses in interviews or in open-ended survey questions. Or open-ended means that it's like you respond however you like. So it's like responses that are whole sentences or paragraphs or conversations. It's unstructured. That's open-ended questions in interviews or surveys. Qualitative research is often exploratory. So there's often a general research question. Well, maybe not too general, but a fairly specific research question, but not a specific hypothesis. It's a question, what's going on here? And you explore it. So qualitative research is good for exploring things. Qualitative research also tends to be more holistic. You're not breaking things down into like factors and numbers and categories that you put into a spreadsheet, but you're trying to do a holistic analysis for holistic understanding of something. So for example, if you're looking at language learners and their experiences in learning a language in a particular type of classroom, what's their experience? You do interviews with them, open-ended interview responses or survey responses, and you are trying to understand the language learner as a whole, not breaking it down into categories in the spreadsheet like grammar performance and motivation scores and test scores and things like that. Qualitative research might use very simple statistics, what we call descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are kind of middle school, high school type statistics. Counts, sums, averages, percentages, ratios, frequencies, how often something happens, things like that. The purpose of that is to describe your data. So qualitative data is more descriptive. And if you do use stats, it's descriptive statistics, simply for describing your data. These kinds of stats don't tell you if X is causing Y, or if there is a real relationship between X and Y. It's just there to describe your subjects or what you're studying. Now, quantitative research, on the other hand, is different. It's very structured data. It's numbers, or maybe for some factors in a spreadsheet, specific categories that are pre-assigned. Again, categories. Let's say you're studying different language learners. So their first language is Korean, Japanese, French, German, Italian. There's specific categories that are pre-assigned. So you have maybe factors that are categories, and you definitely have some factors that are just numbers, like their test scores or other kinds of numerical data. Qualitative research can't necessarily prove something. That's not the point. Qualitative research is more for exploring something, and especially something that's complex. And it might generate some more specific research questions or hypotheses that you could test later scientifically, but the purpose of qualitative research is exploratory. Quantitative research is probative. You're trying to prove something. You've got a specific research hypothesis. So a research question, yeah, but then also a specific research hypothesis. I predict X causes Y. I predict X will happen if you do Y. And so you use statistics, real statistics, to analyze your data. These are statistics that you might not have heard of. These are statistics that show if there's a real relationship between these two things. Is there a real relationship between test scores and their scores on a motivation survey, on a motivation scale? Is there a real meaningful relationship? Is there a causal relationship? Does X cause Y? Those are things that you show with what's called inferential statistics, which are used to infer whether there's a real relationship between two things, or infer if maybe something causes something else. Does X cause Y, or does X lead to Y, or at least is X clearly, strongly related to Y? Use statistics like that, things that, if you're watching this video, maybe you've not heard of. Real statistics tests like ANOVAs and correlation regression and some other stuff, lots of other stuff. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later video. So quantitative research is common in science, engineering, many social sciences like psychology, number of areas like linguistics, many areas of empirical linguistics. Use hypothesis testing to prove or disprove something, using experimental data and experimental results and statistics. Examples. It wouldn't be really interesting to ask how much do Canadians spend per year on maple syrup, but you could ask, okay, why did their purchases of maple syrup increase or decrease last year? Then you would look at different factors, crunch numbers, and prove or disprove some hypothesis as to why, or find out the factors involved. Do second language learners learn this grammar form better using this teaching method, or do they actually understand how to use it? And you would use maybe test scores, maybe surveys with close-ended questions like yes, no, or rate something on a scale of 1 to 5 where you have numbers. Then you could do statistical analysis. Would this method be better than that method for teaching something? Those are the types of questions for which you would use quantitative research. So quantitative papers often follow a very strict structure. I've kind of mentioned this before: abstract, introduction, a literature review, a detailed literature review, which provides the rationale or justification for the study that the researcher is writing. Okay, what's my rationale for this? The researcher tries to identify some new gap that hasn't been looked at before, or a problem with the past research that needs to be improved upon. And that's what the lit reviews section does. Then there is a detailed experimental section, very detailed, so that others can really understand what the researcher did and maybe also do the same if they want to do the same thing or something similar. Then the statistical results, and then a general discussion where the researchers explain the results, what it means, especially in comparison with the past research. If you are a college student writing a college paper, you probably don't need to understand the experimental section in much detail, and especially the statistics. Just get a flavor for what kind of research that they did. That's the important thing. What are the main results in the discussion section, the main findings in the discussion section? That's the key takeaway that you want to look for when you're using this research paper as a source to help write your college paper for your college class. Now let's talk about qualitative research. Qualitative research is empirical, but it uses more unstructured data. It could be open-ended survey questions, open-ended interview questions. observations and notes about what's happening in a situation, video recordings, audio recordings, recorded conversations, or case studies. A case study is a very detailed description of a particular case. It could be an individual student in a learning context. It could also be a company. And in business research, they do case studies where they do a detailed description and analysis of a company, looking at the company's history and its performance. That's kind of qualitative too. So if you like qualitative research and you like business, hey, there's something you can do that could be fun. Within this unstructured data, you then look for patterns or categories. You're guided maybe by some particular theory or particular qualitative research method to find patterns in the data, comparing things, or putting things into categories based on some kind of a theory or framework that you are using. And in the process of maybe finding patterns or categories and classifying things, you take the wholly unstructured data and you kind of turn it into semi-structured data. Semi means partially, so semi-structured data. And from the semi-structured data, you can compare the different things in the categories in more detail to find trends, patterns, something of interest that you're looking for. So you're guided by a research question, not a specific hypothesis. You're not trying to prove or disprove something. You're going for more of an exploratory analysis to just understand the whole thing in a better way. Again, you're guided by often a theory, maybe your own intuitions, an exploratory and holistic. You're not breaking things down into like numbers, but kind of looking at how things work together as a whole. What overall as a whole, what is the experience of language learners in this kind of learning context? Or overall as a whole, what's the lesson to learn from this company's performance? Some examples. How do speakers of this language categorize color terms? You could do that qualitatively. Do students interact with their peers or teachers more enthusiastically when you're using language teaching method A or B? You could do that qualitatively. Do speakers of of a particular language view dialect speakers negatively or positively? Or immigrants, how do they view immigrants' language patterns? What's it like for Korean young students learning particular English grammar forms? And that is kind of from a personal perspective. What is it like for them? Why do speakers of English use the colloquial word like, and like they throw like in like every like phrase or like every sentence? Why do they do that in conversation? That's often done through qualitative research methods, recording conversations and such. Or how do they take turns, and how do they use intonation to kind of manage turn taking? Often people do qualitative research with recorded conversations to look at that. How do immigrant kids from different cultural backgrounds interact in different classroom settings? You could do that qualitatively. Papers written within qualitative research tend to be somewhat varied in their form and structure. It's not as strict as in scientific papers, maybe not quite as loose as humanities papers, but there's somewhat of a structure that's expected in the field. There's going to be some degree of lit review, even if you don't have a specific lit review section. There is going to be some discussion of previous research on the specific topic. Then there's going to be maybe not as detailed as in a quantitative paper, but some description of the research methods and the analysis, how it was analyzed, and then the analysis itself and the discussion of it, and discussion of maybe your ideas and findings compared to what other people found. So if you're reading qualitative papers, some of these can be quite long, and you've kind of got to figure out what's the important stuff. Maybe you read through the research methods kind of quickly, just get a sense of the basic research method. You mainly want to focus on the discussion section and what they found and why it's interesting to you if you're using that as a source for writing your college paper. Now, there are some other approaches that are worth talking about. The main approaches are theoretical, qualitative, quantitative. There are some other approaches that are kind of variations or mixtures of these. One that you hear about is mixed methods approach. Now, the term mixed methods specifically refers to a mixture of qualitative and quantitative research in a single research paper. So, for example, how do speakers of this language use a particular language form, grammar form to express formality? You could use a mixture in the same research paper where you collect data, empirical data that can be used for statistical analysis, but at the same time you can also look at how speakers use the form in context, more of a holistic analysis of how such sentences are used in natural context with natural, actual, real examples that you've gotten. And you try to infer from looking at the context, okay, what's going on here? How is this form being used? And use both of those together, and they complement each other for a deeper understanding of this question. Similarly, be questions of how, speakers of a language view speakers of a dialect. You could do, you could have surveys that are close-ended questions, like rate something on a scale of 1 to 5, and open-ended survey questions, and use those together for a mixed method study of this. Same thing for some of the other examples. Do students have better learning experiences with teaching method A or B? You can look at, test results, but then also give kind of open-ended survey questions to the students and ask them how they felt. And you could use both together for a mixed method study. Those are often very powerful for certain things because it gives you two different perspectives that complement each other. Next are critical, evaluative, and interpretive approaches, which can be a blend of qualitative, quantitative, and or theoretical, any two of those. Evaluative research is often designed to evaluate something according to some set of norms or standards. Is this, for example, is this education program effective? Is this major effective? Is this government program effective? And so you collect data. It could be qualitative data, it could be quantitative data, it could be both. And you're measuring something by some sort of evaluation criteria for effectiveness or performance. So you might use qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods approaches, and there's a bit of theoretical element because you're using some kind of theoretical set of criteria to also match them, to evaluate them. By the way, a lot of research is guided by theoretical questions, but it's the data type, whether the data are qualitative or quantitative, that determines the kind of research approach. So here you can have mixed methods. For example, a particular education program is evaluated to assess its effectiveness according to either some kind of social standards or standards from an education model or theory, or government criteria, or a government program is evaluated according to its own government criteria. Critical is where you critique something looking for evidence of something, and it's often based on a theory. And so there's a theoretical component because you're using some kind of a theory to critique something, and then there's going to be either qualitative or quantitative data, often qualitative, more so qualitative, because you're looking for categories. For example, you're looking for maybe hints of racism maybe in, say, laws. You look at laws, law texts, the law codes of a particular country or state or city, and you look for signs of racial bias or sexist bias based on some linguistic theory or sociological theory about bias. And it could be laws, it could be texts, it could be writings, it could be political speeches, it could be government documents, it could be, administrative documents from somewhere. You're looking for signs of racial bias, sexist bias. You're looking for signs of something else, according to some kind of critical theory. So this is sometimes called critical theory. There's critical theory in sociology, which looks for hints of bias in laws. There's critical discourse theory in linguistics, which is a theory for detecting hints of sexist bias, racist bias, or whatever other kinds of bias in language and the way people use language, like speeches, text, conversations, and such. Interpretive, this is also kind of similar, using a theory or model to interpret a data set, and there's more focus on interpretation of a situation or phenomena to provide insights or analysis. So there's a theoretical component because you're using a theory very much to guide your analysis, and then the data might be qualitative, quantitative, or mixed. So this is kind of a variation on theoretical and some of the others. I talked earlier about literature analysis examples, where you interpret, for example, a piece of literature. That is theoretical, but it could also be considered interpretive if you want to be really more specific, because you're using literary theory or a particular literary theory or general literary theory to guide your interpretation of, say, a poem and the use of language in a poem. So it's kind of interpretive. Another example might be in sociology or education, maybe a data set on a city's education system is interpreted according to some social theory or education theory to yield deeper insights into the needs of the students. And that's kind of very specialized. So unless you're in a very specialized field, you're not going to deal with interpretive that much. Again, except literature analysis, which I usually consider theoretical, if you want to be really specific, is also interpretive research, because you're interpreting the author, you're interpreting pieces of literature, literary works. Interpretive is more common in certain areas of sociology, political science, and such. Finally, this is something that's kind of more specialized, applied research. So I don't mean like applied linguistics, which is a whole field of study, but just applied research methods. And this is where you take maybe experimental results from, say, linguistics research or accepted theories and models, and you kind of make proposals for how this would apply to some practical domain. For example, how insights from recent research in linguistics, empirical research, and a certain theory that goes along with it, you write a proposal for how this could be applied to teaching some particular grammar form, or how findings from sociological research could apply to improving a particular social program. That's kind of applied research, which you might not come across too often. So what's the takeaway from all of this? Well, the type of data that researchers use are going to affect how they write. This is going to affect how you write your college papers, and it's going to affect the research papers that you're reading as sources from scholars or scientists that you're going to use and cite in the college papers that you're writing. So it's going to affect how you use sources and data. Even the type of citation systems, when you use sources, when the scholars you read, when they cite sources, there are different citation formats, and they can look very different according to the needs of the field. And a lot of it depends on the kind of data that they're using, the kind of research methods, and what kind of things are more important. This also might inform you if you're looking for further studies. Are you curious about what you're going to focus on in your third or fourth year of college, or after college, if you want to go on for further studies, like in a master's or PhD program? What would you like to study for? And it's not just what you want to study. That's important, but how do you want to study it? Do you think you would feel more comfortable with doing theoretical research? Maybe you want to go into philosophy or theoretical linguistics. Would you be more comfortable doing empirical research with kind of more qualitative types of data? Well, there are lots of fields where you can do that in sociology, education, qualitative linguistics, applied linguistics. Would you like quantitative research, like crunching numbers and statistics and all that? Maybe you want to go into more of a quantitative linguistics research, or sociology, just quantitative education research, or science and engineering. What appeals to you? That can also guide you in terms of like what kind of paper topic to choose. You need to choose a paper topic for your college course. Well, what attracts you? Do you want to look at the qualitative research on this topic? Do you want to look at the quantitative research on this topic? Or do you want to explore it more theoretically? This can guide you maybe if you're trying to decide on a course to take or a paper to write for your college class, as well as maybe what you want to study in your future studies. I hope this helps. Think about what appeals to you and why. why that appeals to you, and that might help you to maybe have some clarity in your academic studies. Hope this helps. Good luck in your studies, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.